let me ask you something right now. Before we go any further, what is it costing you to stay where you are? Not what you'll gain by changing, not the dream on the vision board. I'm asking about the cost of comfort, the quiet monthly payment you make to staying the same. In energy, in opportunity, in the version of yourself you could have become by now. Because here's the truth, nobody puts on a poster. Success was never the hard part. The challenge is the hard part. And most people, good people, smart people, people with real talent, they don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because somewhere along the way, the challenge showed up and they blinked. I've stood in rooms with men and women who built empires. And I've stood in rooms with men and women just as sharp, just as capable, who never got off the ground. You want to know the difference? It was never talent. It was never luck. It was what they did the moment the challenge looked them in the eye. See, we love the word success. We put it on t-shirts. We chase it like it's a place you arrive at, a finish line with your name on a banner. But success was never a place. Success is a response. It's what you do on a Tuesday morning when nobody's watching and everything in you wants to quit. Think about the life you actually want. Go on, picture it for a second. The career, the relationships, the peace in your own skin when you lay your head down at night. Now ask yourself honestly, what has been standing between you and that life? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the economy. It's not your zip code. It's not the family you were born into or the break you didn't get. Those are circumstances. Real, sometimes brutal, but circumstances are not verdicts. What's been standing between you and that life is a challenge you haven't answered yet. And tonight, right here, in this room, in this moment, I want to hand you something better than motivation. Motivation fades by Thursday. I want to hand you a decision, a stance, a way of meeting the hard days that doesn't depend on how you feel when you wake up. Because somewhere out there is a version of you, leaner, sharper, unafraid, who already said yes to the challenge, who already turned toward the fire instead of away from it. That person is not a fantasy. That person is a possibility. And possibilities only become real one way. They get answered. So let's talk about what it really means to succeed. Not the highlight reel, not the magazine cover, but the daily, unglamorous, courageous act of rising to meet what's hard. Let's talk about the challenge to succeed. Let's slow down on this one, because if you only remember one thing from tonight, I want it to be this: every challenge that has ever shown up in your life, every single one, was not there to break you. It was there to reveal you. Now say that back to yourself for a second. Not to punish yourself, not to poke at old wounds, just to notice something you may have missed the first time it happened to you. We are taught from very early on to see challenge as the enemy. School teaches us that. The workplace teaches us that. Even well-meaning parents teach us that, don't worry, we'll fix it, we'll smooth it out for you. So by the time most of us are adults, we have built an entire relationship with difficulty based on one core belief. If it's hard, something has gone wrong. I want to challenge that belief tonight because it's not true. And it may be the single most expensive lie you've ever unknowingly agreed to. Difficulty is not evidence that something has gone wrong. Difficulty is often evidence that something important is happening. Think about it. in the simplest terms. A muscle doesn't grow because it stayed comfortable. It grows because it was placed under load, right at the edge of what it could handle, and then asked to adapt. The tearing, the soreness, the temporary weakness you feel after a hard workout, that's not damage. That's the doorway to strength. Your body doesn't get stronger in spite of the resistance. It gets stronger because of it. Your character works exactly the same way. Every strong person you know has a scar with a story behind it. Stop and think about the people you admire most. Not the loudest people in the room. Not the ones with the best filter on their photos. I mean, the people whose presence actually makes you want to stand a little straighter. The ones with quiet strength, the ones who seem unshakable, even when life clearly hasn't been easy on them. I promise you this, every one of them has a scar, a layoff they didn't see coming, a marriage that fell apart when they thought it never would, a diagnosis that stopped their world cold on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a failure so public, so humiliating, that for a while all they wanted to do was disappear. Nobody arrives at strength by avoiding difficulty. They arrive at it by going through difficulty and refusing to let it have the final word. Here's what separates those people from everyone else who faced something equally hard. It isn't that they were more talented. It isn't that they were luckier or better connected or born with thicker skin. It's that somewhere in the middle of their dark room, their layoff, their diagnosis, their failure, they made one decision. A small decision, a decision so quiet that nobody else in the room even noticed it happening. They stopped asking, why me? And they started asking, what now? Why me is a locked door. What now is a key. Let's be honest about why me, because I don't want you to think I'm dismissing it. Why me is human. It's real. It shows up the moment life hits us sideways, and it deserves a little room to breathe. Grieve, feel it. You're not a robot. But why me was never designed to be a place you live. It's a hallway, not a house. Because why me doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't require a single ounce of courage. It just sits there replaying the injustice, keeping you tethered to the moment the challenge arrived, instead of moving you toward what you're going to do about it. What now, on the other hand, is a completely different animal. What now requires you to stand up. It requires you to take your eyes off the wound and put them back on the road ahead. It is quite literally the first physical motion of turning your face away from the blow and toward the future. That single question, what now, is the doorway I'm talking about tonight. And here is the part I really need you to hear. Walk through that doorway, and the challenge stops being a wall. It stops being the thing that ends your story. It becomes a hallway. And hallways, by their very nature, lead somewhere. The challenge was never against you. It was for you. I want you to consider something that might feel uncomfortable at first. What if the challenge in front of you right now, the one you've been resenting, resisting, wishing away, isn't happening to you at all? What if it's happening for you? Not in some vague greeting card way. I mean specifically, precisely. Because challenges have a strange and almost surgical way of exposing exactly what needs to be built in us. The challenge that tests your patience is building your patience. The challenge that exposes your fear of rejection is handing you the exact rep you need to stop needing everyone's approval. The challenge that knocks the wind out of your finances is often the very thing that forces the discipline you'd have never developed if life had stayed easy. An invitation isn't always polite. Sometimes an invitation shows up looking like a disaster. But make no mistake, it is still an invitation. It is life asking you a direct question: who are you going to become in response to this? Most people decline the invitation. That's the real tragedy. Here's what troubles me most, and I say this with love, not judgment. Most people, when the challenge arrives, decline the invitation without even realizing that's what they're doing. They don't announce it. Nobody stands up and says, I quit on my potential today. It's quieter than that. It's a slow retreat, a little less risk tomorrow than today, a little more explaining why it can't be done instead of figuring out how it could. And so the challenge, which was trying to hand them a version of themselves they'd be proud of, gets waved off, politely declined, set back down on the porch like an unwanted delivery. I don't want that to be your story. Not this year, not after tonight. What now? Applied to your life, right now, tonight. So let me bring this back to you. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a challenge you have been resenting. Maybe it's a relationship that requires more patience than you thought you had. Maybe it's a career setback that has quietly convinced you that you're behind, that you missed your window, that the good opportunities went to someone else. Maybe it's something inside your own body or your own mind that you're tired of fighting. Here's my invitation to you tonight. Stop asking why. Just for tonight, set why me down. You've carried it long enough. It hasn't gotten you anywhere new, has it? Instead, ask the only question that has ever moved anyone forward in the history of the world. What now? Not what now, someday. Not what now, when I feel ready. What now, today? What is the next right action, however small, however unglamorous, that moves you one step further down that hallway? Because the challenge in front of you is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that something in you is being invited to grow. And the moment you accept that invitation, really accept it, not just nod along to a nice idea, the entire shape of your story changes. The challenge stops being the wall that stopped you. It becomes the hallway that made you. Nobody fails all at once. Nobody. I need you to really sit with that because it goes against everything the outside world tells you about failure. We picture failure as a cliff. One bad decision, one dramatic moment, and suddenly you're falling. The business collapses overnight. The marriage ends in one explosive fight. The dream dies in a single meeting where somebody says no. But that's not how it actually happens. Not really. Failure is rarely a cliff. Failure is a leak, a slow, quiet, almost invisible leak. And by the time you notice the puddle on the floor, you've already lost far more than you realize. The tire nobody's watching picture, a tire with a slow leak. Not a blowout. Not a nail that pops it instantly. Just a tiny puncture, releasing a little air day after day. You don't notice it on Monday. You don't notice it on Tuesday. The car still drives. Everything still seems fine. But 3 weeks later, you're on the side of the road wondering how this happened so suddenly. It wasn't sudden, it was slow. It was patient. It was happening the entire time you weren't paying attention. That's exactly how comfort operates in a human life. It doesn't announce itself as a threat. If it did, we'd fight it, we'd defend against it the way we defend against any obvious danger. But comfort is smarter than that. Comfort never knocks on the front door and says, "I'm here to keep you small." It sneaks in through the back, wearing the disguise of rest, comfort's favorite disguise. "I'll start Monday." Here's how the leak actually sounds out loud in real life. It sounds reasonable. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's the gym membership you meant to use. "I'll go Monday. I'm just tired this week." It's the difficult conversation you've been avoiding with someone you love. "Not tonight. We're both exhausted. We'll talk this weekend." It's the business idea you've been sitting on for 3 years. The one you know has legs. The timing isn't quite right yet. None of those sentences sound like failure. They sound like patience. They sound like wisdom, even. That's exactly the trap. Because comfort doesn't ask you to make one big, catastrophic, obviously bad decision. It just asks for a small delay. Then another, then another. And each individual delay feels completely harmless, a reasonable, human, understandable choice given how you feel in that particular moment. The problem was never any single Monday. The problem is what happens when you string 10 Mondays together. Then 50, then 500, the math nobody wants to do. Let's do something uncomfortable together for a second. Let's do the math on comfort. If you postpone something meaningful by just one day, that feels like nothing. It is nothing in isolation. But postponement, unlike most decisions, has a strange property. It compounds. It doesn't just cost you that one day. It reinforces the pattern of postponing. It teaches your own brain that this is what you do when things get uncomfortable. You wait, and the brain learns fast. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you burnout dressed up as ambition. But there's a profound difference between rest that refuels you for the climb and comfort that quietly convinces you there is no climb worth making. The audit most people are afraid to run. So here's what I want you to do. Not next year, not next month. Tonight, in your own mind, I want you to run an honest audit. Where has comfort been leaking out of your life? Not the big obvious failures. We already know about those. We've already grieved those. I mean the quiet leaks, the idea you haven't pursued, the relationship you've let go stale because conflict felt harder than distance, the health habit you keep promising yourself you'll fix once things calm down, as if things are ever simply going to calm down on their own without you deciding to make them calm. Be honest, not harsh. Honest. There's a difference. Harshness beats you up over the leak. Honesty just finds it so you can finally patch it. Small honesty beats big regret. Here's why this matters so much and why I'm spending real time on it tonight instead of rushing past it. Most people don't fear failure the way they think they do. What they actually fear deep down is arriving at the end of something, a career, a relationship, a decade, and discovering that the leak had been running the entire time and nobody, including them, ever stopped to check. That's a devastating kind of regret. Not "I tried and it didn't work." That kind of regret you can live with. You can even be proud of that kind because at least you showed up. The regret that truly haunts people is the quieter one. I never even really tried. I just let it leak away, one comfortable Monday at a time. You do not have to let that be your story. Patching the leak starts with one true sentence: the good news, and there is very good news here, is that a slow leak can be patched just as slowly and quietly as it started. You don't need a dramatic, cinematic turnaround moment. You don't need to burn the boats and quit your job tomorrow morning. You simply need to stop lying to yourself about what today actually is. Not I'll start Monday. Today. Not the whole mountain, all at once. Just the very next honest action. Make the phone call you've been avoiding. Open the file for the idea you shelved 3 years ago and read just one page of it. Show up to the gym for 20 minutes, not because you feel like it, but because you refuse to let one more day leak away unclaimed. The challenge to succeed doesn't ask you to fix everything tonight. It only asks you to stop the leak, one honest, unglamorous choice at a time. Because the moment you stop leaking, you start filling back up. And a life that stops leaking has a name. We call it a life that's finally moving forward again. Let's talk about the biggest misunderstanding in the entire personal growth conversation. And I mean the biggest one, bigger than any of the others. We have been sold a story that says the successful people among us simply feel more motivated than everyone else, that they wake up every morning burning with some kind of fire the rest of us weren't lucky enough to be born with. That if you could just find your passion, just get inspired enough, just watch the right video or hear the right speech, the motivation would take care of the rest. I need to tell you something tonight that might sting a little before it sets you free. Motivated people are not more successful. Disciplined people are. And those are two entirely different things. The match and the furnace. Let me give you the simplest picture I know for this. Motivation is a match. Strike it, and it lights up fast, bright, hot, impressive for a moment. You feel it in your chest, you post about it, you tell everyone you know you're finally going to change. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, that match keeps burning. But a match was never built to last. It was built to flare and fade. The moment real wind hits it, a bad week, a rejection, a morning where you simply don't feel like it, the match goes out. And here's the cruel part. Most people mistake the going out of the match for the going out of their potential. They think, I guess I just wasn't really committed. When the truth is far simpler. They were relying on the wrong fuel source the entire time. Discipline is a furnace. A furnace doesn't care about wind. It doesn't care what mood walked through the door this morning. It doesn't wait around for inspiration to show up with a cup of coffee and a pep talk. A furnace just says, this is what we do here every day, especially the days we don't feel like it. Why motivation was never designed to carry you. Here's something worth understanding because it removes a lot of unnecessary shame. Motivation is, at its core, a feeling. And feelings, by design, are temporary. They rise and fall based on sleep, stress, blood sugar, what happened in a meeting 3 hours ago, a text message you read wrong. If your entire plan for building the life you want depends on a feeling holding steady day after day after day, you have built your house on the least stable ground available to you. This isn't a character flaw. This is just how human beings are built. Expecting motivation to carry you for a year is like expecting the weather to stay sunny for a year. It won't. It was never going to. And blaming yourself for the storm is a waste of energy you need for something better. Discipline doesn't ask the weather for permission. The person you've never met, but you've seen their results. I've never met a person who found success sitting somewhere, waiting to be discovered like a lucky coin on the sidewalk. Not once. What I have met over and over again is people who built success quietly, unglamorously, one disciplined day at a time, usually with absolutely nobody watching. Here's what that actually looks like up close, because the highlight reel never shows you this part. It looks like getting up at the same time, even on the morning after a hard night's sleep. It looks like making the sales call you don't feel like making because the number of calls made was never something you were willing to negotiate with your mood. It looks like sitting down to write or train or study or build, not because inspiration struck, but because that's simply the hour you decided a long time ago, this is what happens. Stack enough of those unremarkable days together, 600 of them, 1,000 of them, and eventually the outside world looks up and calls it an overnight success. They weren't there for the other 599 nights. They only saw the one night the lights came on. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is a promise. I want to correct a misunderstanding some of you may be carrying because it keeps good people from ever building this skill. Discipline is not some harsh, joyless, drill sergeant version of life where you white knuckle your way through everything you actually want to be doing. That's not discipline. That's just misery with better PR. Real discipline is something closer to a promise you've made to your future self and then quietly, consistently kept. It's the deepest form of self-respect there is. Because think about what happens over time when you consistently break promises to yourself. You start to not trust your own word. You say, I'm going to start Monday, and some part of you deep down doesn't even believe it anymore because you've broken that particular promise so many times before. But the reverse is just as true and far more powerful. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, the workout you didn't feel like doing, the page you wrote when you were tired, the hard conversation you had, instead of avoided, you make a deposit into your own credibility. And eventually, you become someone whose word to yourself actually means something. That's not a small thing. That might be one of the most valuable things a person can build in an entire lifetime. What discipline actually sounds like in the room discipline rarely sounds dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. In real life, it sounds almost boring. It sounds like, I don't feel like it today, and I'm doing it anyway. It sounds like, this isn't convenient right now, and I'm doing it anyway. It sounds like showing up to the exact same unglamorous task on a random Tuesday in February when nobody's cheering, when there's no deadline forcing your hand, when the only person who will ever know whether you showed up or not is you. That's the whole secret, by the way. That's the entire mechanism behind every disciplined life you've ever admired from a distance. Not more talent, not more luck, just a willingness to keep showing up on the boring Tuesdays that motivation would have skipped completely. the shift I want you to make tonight. So here is what I want to leave you with on this one. Stop waiting to feel motivated before you take the next step. Stop treating the absence of that fired up feeling as a legitimate reason to sit still. Motivation was never the qualification for action. It was only ever the bonus on the days it happened to show up. Instead, ask yourself a much better question. Not, do I feel like doing this today? But what did I already decide on a clearer day that I was going to do, regardless of how today feels? That question is the furnace. Feed it consistently, and it will outlast every match you've ever struck. It will still be burning long after the people who were only ever running on motivation have gone quiet, gone home, and gone back to waiting for inspiration to knock on their door again. Discipline doesn't wait for the door to knock. Discipline builds the door. Here's something I need you to hear tonight, even though it might make a few people in this room a little uncomfortable. You cannot outperform the room you spend the most time in, not because you lack the will, not because you lack the talent, but because we are not nearly as independent as we like to believe. We are, all of us, deeply and quietly shaped by the environment we swim in every single day. And most of us have never once stopped to ask whether that water is actually good for us. You are always training, whether you know it or not. Here's a truth about human beings that most people never examine closely enough. We are constantly calibrating, constantly adjusting our sense of what's normal, what's ambitious, what's acceptable, based on the 5 or 6 people we spend the most hours with. Nobody sits us down and teaches us this. It just happens quietly, automatically, beneath the surface of conscious thought. If the people around you treat mediocrity as the finish line, some part of you starts to believe mediocrity is the finish line too. Not because you're weak, not because you don't have your own mind. It's because human beings are wired for belonging, and belonging has a price. The price is often this: we unconsciously shrink or expand to match the room. This is not a character flaw. This is biology. This is thousands of years of survival wiring, built for tribes and villages, still running quietly in the background of your modern life. And it means the room you're standing in matters far more than most people are willing to admit. The ceiling nobody built on purpose. Think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how a goal that feels completely reasonable in one group of friends feels almost embarrassing to say out loud in another? Same goal, same person saying it. Completely different reception because the room changed. That's your ceiling being built brick by brick without a single person ever intending to build it. Nobody in that second room sat down and said, let's make sure nobody here reaches too high. They didn't have to. Their own comfort with a smaller version of life did the work for them silently, just by being in proximity to you often enough. I've watched brilliant people carry extraordinary ideas that could have changed their entire trajectory, and slowly talk themselves out of them, one dinner conversation at a time, surrounded by people who meant well, but had quietly made peace with staying exactly where they were. This isn't about abandoning people. It's about being honest. I want to be careful here because I don't want you to hear something I'm not saying. This is not a call to cut people out of your life the second they haven't made it. by whatever definition you're currently using. That's not wisdom. That's arrogance wearing a self-help costume. Some of the most important people in your life will never chase the same goals you're chasing. And that doesn't make them lesser, and it doesn't mean you owe them distance. A parent who never built a business can still be a source of deep love and grounding. A friend who has no interest in your career ambitions can still be exactly the person you need on your hardest days. What I am asking you to examine is something more specific. Who is actually speaking into your decisions? Whose voice do you let carry weight when you're deciding whether to take the leap, have the hard conversation, chase the harder version of your life? Because there is a difference between people you love and people you let shape your ceiling. And sometimes, quietly, without meaning to, they're the very same people. The room doesn't need to reject your dream. It just needs to be neutral about it. Here's what surprises people most when they finally examine this honestly. The rooms that hold us back are rarely hostile. Almost nobody sits across from you and says, "Don't do that, you'll fail." That would be easy to recognize and resist. It's far quieter than that. It's the shrug, the change of subject, the well-meaning, "just be careful," repeated so many times it starts to sound like doubt. The absence of anyone asking how the goal is going, because nobody in the room actually expects it to go anywhere. Silence and mild indifference are just as capable of lowering a ceiling as outright criticism. Sometimes more so, because they're so much harder to notice, let alone name. Outgrowing a room is not betrayal. I know this next part is hard for a lot of good-hearted people to accept, so let me say it as gently and as clearly as I can. Outgrowing a room is not a betrayal of the people in it. It is not arrogance. It is not thinking you're better than anyone. It is simply respect for the person you are becoming, and the honest recognition that growth sometimes requires new soil. A seed that stays in the same small pot forever, no matter how good that pot once was, will eventually become root-bound. Not because the pot did anything wrong, just because it did its job for a season, and that season has ended. The challenge to succeed will, at some point, ask something uncomfortable of you. It will ask you to be honest about which rooms are helping you grow and which rooms, however comfortable, however familiar, have quietly become the ceiling on your life. Choosing your circle on purpose instead of by accident. Most people never choose their circle. It happens to them. Proximity, convenience, history, these things assemble a circle around a person almost without their consent. And then that circle, assembled entirely by accident, ends up deciding how big or small that person's life is allowed to become. I want something different for you. I want you to start choosing on purpose, not perfectly, not overnight. Just start paying attention. Notice who energizes the version of you that wants to grow and who quietly, consistently talks that version of you back down to size. Notice whose ambitions make you feel challenged in a good way and whose resignation makes challenge itself start to feel foolish. You don't need to make dramatic announcements. You don't need to burn bridges. You simply need to start being intentional about where you spend your attention, your evenings, your open ear. Seek out at least one relationship, even just one, with someone whose standards are higher than the room you've been standing in. Let their normal stretch your normal. The room changes the person changes the room. Here's the hopeful flip side of everything I've just said, and I don't want you to leave without it. Just as a room can lower your ceiling, a room can raise it too. And you have more power over that than you think, not just by choosing better rooms to enter, but by becoming yourself, the kind of presence that raises the ceiling for someone else. Because somewhere out there tonight, there's a person whose ceiling could rise simply because you refuse to lower yours. Somebody watching how you handle a setback, how you keep your word, how you chase a hard goal without needing permission from the room. You don't just inherit a ceiling. Eventually, if you build the discipline and the character we've already talked about tonight, you start setting one for everyone lucky enough to stand near you. That is the quiet, often invisible power of the room you choose to build. Let me close this part of the message with the one keynote that matters most, precisely because it's the one nobody's watching you work on. Nobody claps for you at 5 a.m. Nobody's in the room when you keep a promise you made to yourself and nobody else even knows about. There's no audience for the version of you that shows up before the sun does. And I want to tell you tonight, that's not a coincidence. That's the entire point. We've been trained to look for legacy in the wrong place. We live in a culture that puts legacy on a stage. The retirement party, the award on the mantle, the headline, the interview, the moment everyone's watching, and someone hands you a microphone to say something meaningful. So naturally, we start to believe that's where legacy actually gets built, in that visible, celebrated moment. It isn't. That moment is just where legacy finally gets announced. The building happens somewhere else entirely, somewhere with no lighting, no audience, and no applause. Legacy is built in the parking lot before anyone else's car has arrived. It's built in the extra hour spent on work nobody asked you to perfect because you refused to let anything with your name on it be average. It's built in the version of a hard conversation you had honestly, even though a shortcut version would have been so much easier and nobody would have known the difference. Nobody claps for any of that. Nobody's supposed to. The math of an unseen life. Think about how much of any meaningful life is actually invisible. If you add up the hours spent training, studying, practicing, showing up, keeping promises to yourself, and then compare that to the hours anyone else ever actually sees or celebrates, the ratio is staggering. 99% of a well-built life happens completely off camera. That should change how you think about the unseen hours. If almost the entire game is invisible, then the invisible hours aren't the warm-up for the real thing. They are the real thing. The visible moment at the end, the achievement, the recognition, the stage is just the tip of an iceberg that took years to build beneath the surface, where nobody could see it forming. Why? The unseen hours are actually the honest test. Here's what makes those unseen hours so revealing and so important. When somebody's watching, most of us rise to the occasion. We perform, we show our best selves because an audience creates accountability, even a small one. But take the audience away completely. Take away the deadline, the applause, the possibility that anyone will ever know one way or the other. What do you do then? That's not a small question. That's actually the whole question. Because who you are in the room with no witnesses is who you actually are. Everything else, the version people see, is just a highlight reel built on top of that foundation. I've come to believe this is the truest measure of character there is. Not what someone does when everyone's watching, but what they do when the only person who will ever know is them. The temptation to skip the invisible work. Let's be honest about why so many people quietly avoid this kind of work. It's not because they don't care about their future. It's because invisible effort feels in the moment like it might not be counting for anything. There's no immediate proof. No likes, no praise, no scoreboard lighting up to confirm that this hour mattered. So it's tempting, deeply, humanly tempting, to save your real effort for the moment somebody will actually see, to coast through the unseen hours and save the performance for when it counts. But here's the problem with that strategy. The unseen hours are where the actual skill, the actual character, the actual foundation gets built. Skip enough of them, and when the visible moment finally arrives, the interview, the big opportunity, the test, there's nothing underneath to support it. The stage collapses because nobody built the foundation while no one was looking. A different way to measure a day. I want to offer you a different way to evaluate whether a day actually meant something. One that has nothing to do with whether anyone noticed. At the end of the day, don't ask, did anyone see what I did today? Ask instead, if nobody ever finds out about today, was it still worth doing? That single question changes everything about how a person operates. It removes the need for an audience entirely. It roots your effort in something far more stable than recognition. It roots it in your own respect for yourself. And self-respect, unlike applause, doesn't run out. It doesn't depend on anyone else's schedule, mood, or attention span. It's available to you at 5 a.m. alone every single day for the rest of your life. The people who actually change things were never chasing the stage. Look closely at the lives of anyone who has ever built something that outlasted them. And I mean, really look past the highlight reel, and you'll find the exact same pattern every time. Years of unglamorous, unwitnessed repetition, long before any stage existed. The stage came later. It was never the goal. It was the byproduct. That order matters enormously. And I want you to remember it. The unseen hours come first, and the visible moment, if it comes at all, comes after as a result of the invisible work, not as the reason for it. The moment someone starts doing the work, primarily to be seen doing it, the quality of the work quietly begins to erode. Because performing for an audience and building for a legacy are two very different disciplines, and only one of them actually lasts. What this means for you tonight. So here's what I want to leave you with as we close this part of the message. Somewhere in your life, right now, there is unseen work waiting for you. Nobody assigned it. Nobody's checking. There's no deadline forcing your hand, and there may never be applause waiting on the other side of it. That's not a reason to skip it. That's the whole reason it matters. Do the rep nobody sees. Have the integrity nobody's around to confirm. Keep the promise you made to yourself in a quiet moment, even though breaking it would cost you nothing but your own private sense of who you are. Because legacy was never given out on a stage under bright lights. Legacy is earned in the dark, hour after unremarkable hour, long before the lights ever come on, if they come on at all. And when they finally do, the world will call it an overnight success. You'll know better. You'll know exactly how many quiet, unseen mornings it actually took to get there.